The NWC meeting. We're joined by our political analyst Ongama Mtinka via Skype. Ongama, very good morning to you. Today, the members are expected to nominate the new leadership, and Stu Dlamini has not outrightly come out to say he's not going to stand for a second term or not. Do you think he will?
Well, we know there's a view that Zingiswalosi might be the person, first woman actually, to be the president of Cosatu. And so it may be that actually he's seeing that he shouldn't stand. But you never know with these congresses. Sometimes when the nomination process comes during Congress, he may accept nomination, and there may be people ready to raise his name. But if you look at what's happened in the past a decade almost, Cosatu under his leadership has really suffered. There's been a splinter. There was first the ill-fated firing of Numsa. Secondary from that, the firing of Zwelinzima Vavi and the breakaway of Saftu. So there's been quite a lot of instability during his time. And I think he got the awakening call very late about how divisive their continued blind support for President Zuma was on Cosatu and its sustainability as an organization.
During the 54th National Conference of the African National Congress, there was a lot of excitement around Zingiswalosi, who came in on a nomination of Deputy Secretary General, and that wasn't to be. Are we going to get disappointed again?
Look, if you talk about the capability and popularity of Zingiswalosi, she's somebody that has had a long experience within the trade union movement, has got the experience, she knows that movement, and as you say, her clout politically took her even to that position of Deputy Secretary General. So she's quite a bigwig, and she enjoys support from a wide range of support bases within Cosatu. So one would expect that she will give in a good running for whoever becomes the contestant for that position, and quite the right pick in terms of her politics.
Historically, trade unions were created for men, really, because women were not allowed to work, and the leadership of trade unions came out to obviously be the male species. But what significance would this have if Zingiswalosi were to make it to the helm of Cosatu?
There has been great women trade unionists going as far back as the, I think, 1920s in South African history. And they have been quite formidable politicians. I think among them, Florence Maxeke, if my memory serves me well. So they have been really great politicians. In terms of what it means now, the question always arises when it comes to women leadership is the ability to actually exploit the natural inclination of women to be caring and to draw wider constituencies, and whether they'll be able to do that when they get given positions. And I think one of my colleagues recently wrote about Inimba, the ability that women have to respond more compassionately to things, and whether during her time the plight of workers, which because of political unionism over time became secondary to the broad political imperatives of the tripartite alliance movement, will now actually get center stage again.
In an era where workers have more access to the law and legal processes, what's the relevance of trade unions?
So trade union movements, I think this is a debate which was there at Cosatu in 1982 about whether trade unions should focus exclusively on shop floor issues and incapacitate their shop stewards to be able to better represent workers at that level, or they should adopt what's called political unionism, where they seek to advance their agenda both within the shop floor as well as politically in terms of relationships such as the tripartite alliance relationship. And I know that's actually Cosatu now is continuing to actually explore more voice within the tripartite alliance, which means that it wants to continue to be to adopt a political approach to its unionist to its unionism. The challenge with that is that, as we have seen, the politics of the ANC have tended to be very divisive in the democratic period, and as such, unions are then drawn there, and they become relatively weakened. And this is something the trade union movement acknowledges, that to focusing too much on politics has weakened the ability to focus on building a cadership within the trade union movement that is able to actually prioritize worker issues at shop floor and increase the gains there.
What impact did the departure of Zwelinzima Vavi have, and NUMSA, you've mentioned that before in the conversation, had on Cosatu?
It had a huge impact. I mean, if you think about it, NUMSA was one of the biggest trade unions and had been very influential in South African politics. Same goes with SAFTU. I think that bad relationship was allowed to deteriorate to a level that was not in the interest of workers, and what Cosatu needs to think about at this time is that it's operating within a changed environment in terms of which it was already suffering blows from, for example, AMCU. Now it has one of its own, an organization that is perceived to be among the Congress movements in terms of the politics of liberation and NDR. That is a competition to Cosatu. I think they should explore discussions about whether it's not time to actually reach out again to SAFTU, because neither SAFTU nor Cosatu will be strong without the other. But they need to be sure that worker issues are prioritized, as well as also the ideological issues. That NUMSA, for example, assumed a very Marxist-Leninist position in theory, which they then criticized the rest of Cosatu as having lost relevance. So they would need to actually humble themselves, all of them, SAFTU and Cosatu, and explore whether union together is not to better preferred than, for example, pursuing the alliance, which always promises ahead of ANC conferences, whichever president comes, always promises a greater relationship, greater voice for Cosatu, only to marginalize the union movement once they get into power.
On that point, one of the stated conversation points for this conference is Cosatu saying that it wants to approach the African National Congress about equality in the tripartite relationship. Are they going to achieve this?
It's the same old story, Des. I think as far back as 2012, the left in general has been wanting more voice, and they felt that in 2007 they had achieved that. But the ANC is a broad church, and it is governing a country, and it is contested by business, various civil society organizations, and it will always be contested. So I think it's better for Cosatu to actually explore stronger relationships within the trade union movement itself. They argue that internally within the ANC, they have a greater voice and therefore can influence policy. But so far, if you take the issue of labor brokers, that has got limitation in terms of how far that influence they have goes.
Ongama, last week the South African Broadcasting Corporation announced that it will be letting go of some of its staff members because it has a huge salary bill and a bloated workforce. And the SG of the African National Congress comes into these conversations and says, we will not let this happen. But it's the same SG who is under pressure himself because of a meeting he held with a previous president and the contents of that meeting. So we're looking forward to the NWC of the ANC this morning. Give us a sense of what will happen there.
I think top on the agenda is going to be these rumors of a plot. And I think the Secretary General is going to get more in terms of questioning with respect to his narration of what happened. But beyond that, the challenge with the civil service in general is that it was allowed to become very bloated, and the way in which it did so was not necessarily in terms of what the services that are core to the state in terms of delivering infrastructure and delivering core services, because you still find that there are huge vacancies, for example, within the healthcare system as well as the education system. So while there are pressures, there's need to realign the workforce and make sure that it is fit for purpose and also optimal, that you don't have the inefficiencies that are there. But what you find with politicians is that they frame themselves sometimes, even counter what should be logic. They frame themselves as I mean, I'm referring now to the case of the SG, as supporting broad populist positions only for the benefit of the public perceptions that generates, not because from a leadership point of view, it's the right thing to do. Last one for me on this issue. It's important that the Ramaphosa administration prioritizes reducing the size of the bloated cabinet before focusing on the civil service and the efficiencies there.
I really like that you refer to SABC workers as part of the civil service, because we struggle with the separation sometimes as to where we belong.
Indeed, I mean, if I remember well, the SABC has got 1% from government so that it can remain a public broadcaster. The challenge with the SABC, I think there has been a time of consistent mismanagement, which has resulted in opportunities to generate more revenue being lost and forgone for private interests. I'm thinking about the SuperSport deals, for example, and the SAFA deals. Also, the general mismanagement of funds under Hlaudi Motsoeneng and that board, that was there. So it's unfortunate that workers get to bear the brunt of bad mismanagement by the company. But also we have to bear in mind the historic issues of the previous radio stations from the homelands that got integrated into the SABC. So we don't know, for example, which of the inefficiencies do they arise mainly from broad managerial issues in the post currently, or some of them are historic from how the SABC, how the integration was done with all the other radio stations that were there before.
So are you thinking that the decision to retrench staff is a good one?
It's never a good idea for a business to start with reducing staff. There's always there's a general principle within strategic management that says if you can increase the top line, if you can increase the revenue and find ways to increase income, that's always more preferred than either cost cutting and employee retrenchments, because that by its nature creates a culture of fear within the organization and is never a good environment to operate from.
So just to wrap up our conversation, the Cosatu 13th conference, we're talking a lot about the leadership, but Cosatu is essentially about the worker. How should South Africans be engaging with this conference in order to make workers' issues relevant at such gatherings?
One of the big issues is the issue around living wage as well as income inequality. So in South Africa, I mean, inequality has been increasing over time, as well as what's called structural unemployment. So trade unions, among other things, among the problems that they are facing, one of them is actually a relatively less unionized workforce than would be ideal, and failure to attract some sectors that remain outside of their reach, while at the same time campaigning for a market, an economy that is able to create especially manufacturing jobs. So the big challenge, I think, for them is also contributing on broad strategic issues in South Africa with respect to how we should industrialize, how we should revitalize the economy, and how do we create a stable labor environment where it can continue to attract investments, while at the same time making sure that the gains of workers are not weakened, but also making sure that the workers that are inside the economy are not too demanding, such that they close the space and make it uneconomical for employing new workers, because we have a huge unemployment problem in South Africa. So while we need to fight for a greater share of national income by workers, there's a challenge also to create to open up the space for more people to be employed.
So much of the conversation about growth is now about the fourth industrial revolution. How much emphasis are we giving, as you touched on it just now, to manufacturing and industrialization?
South Africa has a very unhealthy skew towards the services sector in its economy. I mean, as a developing country, we shouldn't have the services sector being the main driver, because by its nature, sometimes it's parasitic. Whether you're looking at retail, whether you're looking at financial speculation and banking, all of those sectors are not sustainable in the long term. You need to, in order to have that sector, you need to have a very strong primary industries, agriculture and mining, as well as industrialization. And the challenge with the fourth industrial revolution is that there's a threat. I mean, the estimate is that over 2 billion jobs are going to be lost going into 2050. So there's need to think differently about ways of earning income in a fast-changing world.
We thank you very much for your time. We've kept you long enough. Ongama Mtinka is with the Nelson Mandela University in the Eastern Cape.